All right. Well, as always, we'll start by just saying that we appreciate everybody for joining us for this session. We have an awesome group of panelists here talking about something that I think is very pressing for anyone who oversees any level of your IT cloud strategy, whether that's on-prem or in the cloud. Before we go into introducing the panel here, I want to set the backdrop for why we're having today's discussion. And I think the reality for anyone who is working on behalf of their cloud strategy at any organization is that enterprise IT is really caught in a tug of war that didn't exist 5 years ago. On one side, public cloud spending is increasing year over year, and that's not changed in the last decade. Gartner projected that it would surpass $723 billion in spending in 2025, and an additional 21% in 2026. The hyperscalers alone are pouring roughly $660 billion into AI as we speak. AI workloads now consume more data center power than traditional compute combined. You see memory and storage vendors not being able to keep up. The demand is at an all-time high, scarcity is at an all-time high, and prices have surged to levels that we haven't seen in decades. And the 5 largest cloud companies are each spending over $100 billion annually on infrastructure, a pace that would have been unthinkable 18 months ago. And on the other side, workloads are moving back on premise. As Forrester will talk about in a little bit with Tracy, the latest data shows that workloads are being repatriated to on-prem at a very high rate compared to the last 5 years. Barclays reports that 86% of long-term strategies for CIOs is to continue to bring some workloads back from the public cloud to on-prem. And the reality is it's not because the public cloud failed, but because the economics of running AI, managing data sovereignty, and operating at scale have forced a reckoning with where work actually belongs. And so the result is that most enterprises now have a long-term strategy of hybrid. And that means that decisions being made right now, what to keep, what to move, what to modernize, and what to walk away from are some of the most consequential decisions IT leaders have faced in a generation. And then you drop a vendor disruption into the middle of all of this that is kind of a once-in-a-career disruption. A few years ago, CloudBolt commissioned, as we do, research reports, independent research reports around the kind of dynamics of what's shaping cloud decisions for organizations. We looked at post-acquisition, the Broadcom VMware acquisition. We looked at how leaders were thinking about that at the time, in kind of when the panic was at an all-time high. Recently, we released an extension of that report where we asked 302 IT director plus decision makers to tell us what's transpired over the last few years. And while most thought there was going to be a mass exodus and a mass exit very quickly, it wasn't a stampede. And that's what we've seen with a lot of our customers, and it's what a lot of leaders are facing right now. But the data does tell a very interesting story. 86% are actively reducing their footprint with VMware. 57% absorbed cost increases over 25%. Most organizations report that they did see increases of some magnitude. Only 4% have fully moved away from VMware, but nearly every organization agrees that the squeeze is just beginning. This is not going away and is not slowing down. So today we're going to unpack what's actually happening. The economics, the migration reality, the modernization decisions, and the operating models that are either working or falling apart in this new paradigm. And we brought together 4 perspectives that I think bring really good, unique positions to cut through this noise. So I'll introduce them now. Tracy Woo is a principal analyst at Forrester, where she leads research on FinOps, hybrid cloud management, and IT financial management. She advises Fortune 100 and 500 companies pretty much every week on cloud cost strategy, governance. She's been cited in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and Business Insider. And Tracy, you've brought some really good data with you today, which we'll get into shortly. Very excited to have you as a part of this discussion. For those who don't know Sean Petty, he's our Chief Customer Officer here at CloudBolt. He's in the field every day with enterprise leaders who are navigating this transition. But prior to CloudBolt, Sean spent 8 years at IBM leading forming and leading the cloud management platform offering for the federal space. Sean, you've lived through enough platform shifts to know what's actually working, what traps are out there, and how to navigate disruption to the best of your ability. So good to have you on this one. Ghufran Shah is a business development director and co-founder of Metsi, now Nubera, which is a UK-based partner with over 30 years of experience in IT automation, orchestration, service management. Ghufran, you have active VMware to other alternative hyperscaler migrations happening right now. Chiefly Nutanix is a lot of the work that your team's doing in EMEA, and that's across healthcare, manufacturing, financial services, and more. You've also co-authored IBM Red Books, 8 of them, it looks like, and are a Forbes Technology Council member. So I'm sure you got a lot of insights and thoughts on this discussion. Thanks for joining us. And then finally, Mike Bombard. If you worked with CloudBolt at all, you know Mike. He leads our solution engineering practice as a director here. Before joining CloudBolt, Mike spent years at Northrop Grumman and the Social Security Administration, managing tens of thousands of virtualized workloads, predominantly on VMware solutions, and led very large-scale migrations from data center to data center. So we talked about technical complexity of getting off VMware or really onto any other hypervisor. Mike's the one who can tell you what works and what doesn't. And my name is Will Norton. I am a VP of product marketing here at CloudBolt. Prior to this, I oversaw the cloud migration practice for Cognizant Technology and consulted Fortune 50 customers and beyond on how to get out of the data center and into the public cloud. So certainly no stranger to this topic either. Whew. With that, let's get into it. So Tracy, you've brought some really good quantitative data as well as qualitative insights from your discussions. I'll kick it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Will, for the introduction. Appreciate you. I want to share some insights that we have. We're actually exploring this question quite a bit, and we have a decent amount of data behind this that I'm excited to share with you. And this conversation about the infrastructure curve has changed. It's actually existed for quite a while. When people were thinking about where do we invest? Are we investing in the data center? Are we investing in cloud environments? Do we trust it? Is this something that we should migrate to? That was a question that came up 10 years ago. And about 5-6 years ago, it became this frenzied rush to cloud migration. There's almost this FOMO of we must migrate to cloud, otherwise we're missing out. We must use the cloud services, otherwise there's competitive differentiation there. And what really happened was that as people over-rotated on cloud, they started to think, wait a second, not everything should be in the cloud. Some of the things don't make sense there. AI has certainly brought up that question of performance, latency, costs, especially for large enterprises that have the capital to build out their own data centers, which is not a lot of companies, but they're some of the biggest spenders. They're thinking about how do we use AI on-prem? Could we use it in localized devices? Could we use this as some sort of colo provider, a private cloud, or could we use some of the managed services that the public cloud provides, like Outposts or Anthos? And so what we've seen is that the workload repatriation has started to increase. Now, what I want to emphasize is that this is not mass hysteria. This is not everyone saying the cost issues are here, the AI issues are here. Even sovereignty has been a big question, especially with what's happening within our political global climate right now. And a lot of organizations are exploring this right now, especially within the EU. There's also this realization that there are some areas that just require on-premises management, whether it is for digital sovereignty or data sovereignty reasons, or whether it's for performance or latency reasons, or whether it's just regulatory compliance. So we have that 34% of workloads, they are repatriating back to on-prem. We do expect that number to creep up, but it's not going to go up in massive numbers. And on the other hand, 95% of total app portfolios, they have migrated today, or they plan to in 2 years. And that speaks to the promise of cloud and how folks are needing those managed services, whether it's just simple things like serverless capabilities, functions as a service, all the way to things like black box AI services, like your Bedrock, like your Copilot AI. And the thing that I want to emphasize here is that those cloud providers are the backbone of the global infrastructure, which means that a lot of people are locked in and they're choosing to be locked in. And so there is this question of which way do I go? So if we're looking at the next slide here, that organizations are hybrid. And this number is actually increased. So we asked this question as long as I've been at Forrester. It started in the high 70%, crept up into the 80%, 98% right now describe their cloud strategy as hybrid. I would argue that every organization, except those that are net new or decided to completely migrate, have some form of a hybrid strategy. And it's not a concession that private cloud is failing us and we must use public cloud or vice versa. It is just the reality of the climate today that most organizations cannot exist without each of these environments. And actually, that was one of our predictions last year, which is that private cloud is not going away, that private cloud investment is necessary and important, and it actually will continue to increase. So if we're looking at the next slide here, what we're seeing is that where are they investing? They're investing across all of these different environments: public cloud, hosted private cloud, internal private cloud. And it speaks to how the strategy is not in one specific area. It is in all of these different areas. Hosted private cloud being things like colo providers where you're using some data center where they're either managing it for you or you're managing it yourself. It's just something that's not on premises. But looking at the next slide of where else are they managing these environments, they're exploring other alternatives too. And these are all some form of private cloud, whether it is on-premises infrastructure. So these could be on-premises infrastructure like things like Outposts who still have some regional dependency. These could be things like private cloud, like what OCI is providing and really trying to create differentiation in with their air-gapped data centers and speaking to the sovereignty requirements. VMware on cloud on hyperscalers, which has made the migration efforts much easier. There's also on-premises containers, and there are tools that actually have focused more on the on-premises side than they are on the public cloud side. And you could say one is the management side of it, but also it's a stepping stone. Because in some areas, people do see hybrid cloud as a stepping stone, whereas we will modernize, then migrate before we actually commit to public cloud. And then some just use other hypervisors. There are concerns about specific hypervisors that we are using, and does it make sense for us, just from a cost perspective? Or should we be looking in other directions? So now if we're looking at the next slide here, hybrid cloud objectives, now and in 2 years, they're being spanned across different ways, because how do we control this? How do we manage this? How do we get centralized visibility? Because especially if we have applications that are spanning across on-prem and public cloud, or if we have specific edicts like the Digital Operation Resilience Act within the EU, where you, for business continuity reasons, financial services must have a way to provide business continuity and failover. Often that failover is happening onto on-prem environments, not from cloud to cloud, because that is quite expensive. Hybrid movement, which is movement either in one direction or the other, repatriation or migration, or it's even just this willingness, especially for AI work cases where you are perhaps keeping your data close to the compute that you're using. Say you're using CDNs to be able to create compute closer to your data versus putting a huge load on your own infrastructure. And then hybrid cloud management tools where you have this abstraction layer to have visibility across these different workloads. So going to the next slide here, there's this expansion of the new FinOps framework. And I would argue, okay, it's not new now. It's probably 12 months old. The FinOps Foundation is the leading organization that manages the thought leadership and the trends of where FinOps is going. And the thing that I wanted to point out here is that the definition has changed. It's changed from just managing cloud infrastructure to cloud and technology. And that expansion has gone from just public cloud to also SaaS management, to also on-premises management. And it's started to take this more overarching arc of what does IT finance mean, and what is the role of, say, a FinOps team versus an IT finance team, and is there a separation, or should these two practices start to get integrated increasingly? And the thing is, I wanted to say is that they're not necessarily competing. They come in at different layers. Your IT finance team is coming in at the executive layer. Your FinOps team is coming in at the practitioner layer. So if you're looking at things like optimization of cloud costs, those cloud costs come in as a line item. If you're looking at data center and cost management and trying to look at investment to value, for the FinOps side of it, you're looking at optimization. You're looking at data center footprints. You're looking at when should we be running our workloads because of electricity costs or cooling costs. And then the same thing for SaaS. There's this inclusion of just SaaS management, but also SaaS optimization. And the reason why it's expanding into these different areas is because the ROI of FinOps is proven. And so what's happening is the executives say, this works for us. What if it could work in these other different areas?
So with this expansion of FinOps, what we're seeing is this question about who owns the overall ownership of IT costs. We've already talked about how FinOps has proven its ROI. We've seen organizations start to shift in an area where we are either integrating those teams, your IT finance team and your FinOps team, where they're actually starting to retire those teams. And so what we've seen is that 92% of FinOps teams are integrating their workflows with the IT budget and management. And what I would argue is that they are not contradictory to each other. What's actually happening is that they're coming in at different layers. Your IT finance team is coming in at a finance and CIO perspective. Your FinOps teams are practitioners that are looking at the lower level engineering costs. And so because of that, there's this need of integration to be able to get this overall cost, whether it is on-prem, whether it is in public cloud, whether it decides to go into another different environment. And so I'll stop there and we can go ahead and get to the questions.
It's a good segue to the first topic that I think if you're listening to the banter in the market right now, it's a lot of it is stemming from cost. Let's talk about the economics of the disruption that's happening right now. 57%, as I said earlier, experienced cost increases greater than 25%, albeit that was a lot lower than what the expectation was in 2024 when this was initially happening. But that does change the economics of on-prem. And I know that for a long time, a lot of decisions around where workloads would go really did start and stop with cost. And I think we all can agree that that's no longer the case. And so, Sean, let me start with you. You're in these conversations with enterprise customers every day. When a CFO sees their infrastructure costs jump 25 to 50% overnight, what's the first question they're asking? And what are the kinds of answers that actually get them moving versus just absorbing this hit in the short term?
I think that most of the customers that obviously we experience have some sort of governance in place, have some sort of identification of costs in place, where they can actually identify what is the pain point, what is the driver of this. How they react to that is much different. That's about FinOps practice adoption. That's about how they actually respond to the upticks that they see and those types of things. But for the most part, they're really diving into, is this an anomaly or is this systemic to something larger? So that's at the CIO level, that's what they want to understand first. Is this something I'm experiencing because it is a one-time event? It is something, that is related to some sort of failure, some sort of code issue from an application perspective? Or is this because we turned something on and this is going to continue? So I think that's the first thing that they want to understand. And then from there, they're into pure, triage mode.
So, Ghufran, you're seeing this across EMEA. Are the cost dynamics playing out differently in Europe versus what we're seeing in North America related to Broadcom and VMware? And how does data sovereignty factor into these decisions?
Absolutely. Well, so EMEA is quite interesting because we're experiencing a fundamentally different economic shock than North America. We've got GDPR and data sovereignty requirements, which aren't nice to have; they're legal requirements. So in North America, customers you've got minimal escape routes. You can go to a hyperscaler of your choice with relative ease. But in Europe, it's rather more brutal because we're seeing cases of up to 1,500% increases because customers can't just go to the cloud like their US counterparts. So, for example, a German bank can't put customer data in AWS Ireland without massive compliance overhead, and a Dutch healthcare provider can't use Azure US regions. So that's giving us a lot more sleepless nights, and this whole capex to opex shift hits differently here as well because you've got the European CFOs are used to predictability in their infra investments over 3 to 5 years. But now we're facing these volatile subscription costs, which during economic uncertainty are quite terrifying. And the interesting thing is that this whole thing about data sovereignty is not complicating migration. It's creating a premium market now for sovereign alternatives. And we're seeing hyperscalers now who can offer sovereign European data lakes. And we're seeing just such strong demand now for on-premise solutions like Nutanix and EMEA, where customers will pay for control when compliance is non-negotiable. And that's the key thing. Compliance in Europe is non-negotiable, and the ecosystem around that is driving up costs. And finally, if we look at a customer base, who's going to succeed here? Those who see sovereignty and economics. This whole problem, it's not a technical problem, right? It's we're building infrastructure strategies that will give us both cost predictability and compliance. They're two key areas which I think are hit hard in Europe as opposed to North America.
Do you think that the dynamics you're talking about lead to more squeezing happening by Broadcom and the other vendors, or is there still some negotiation room and power, I guess, from organizations?
I'm seeing the little leverage from vendors. There's no squeezing room. It's either thou will pay X amount, or you will no longer be a customer. So now we're seeing. I think Tracy yourself mentioned earlier on about 5 years ago. There's this massive shift to the cloud. If you look at what drove that, if you look at pre-COVID, there were a lot of strategies. Shall we go to the cloud? Shall we not go to the cloud? Customers spending millions on reports. COVID happened and they had no choice. All right, that was a compelling event. And now it's similar times now. We're seeing customers have to do something, and we're not saying you've got to move overnight, but have a strategy in place. And hybrid is the flavor of the month, flavor of the year now to come. Hybrid is going to be that default position, and the squeeze is real hard in Europe.
So Tracy, maybe to you, just because one of the quotes that stuck out to us, we've got here on the screen from our research, and that is that ultimately the predictable cost model that's on-prem is largely evaporated with some of these changes in the hypervisor market. And so, as you think about financial governance and what frameworks IT leaders should be using to regain cost predictability when their infrastructure vendor fundamentally changes the economic model on them, I know you mentioned FinOps. Is that where most organizations' heads are at right now, or are they still exploring? What advice would you give?
Well, there are two different layers to that. So I was saying before, so your IT finance team, they are looking at the overarching cost spent from a CIO level. So they are thinking about HR. They are ingesting data from things like general ledger, from HR timesheets, using analysis from FP&A tools to be able to provide this overarching cost management and structure, because ultimately what they want to do is connect this investment to business value. FinOps tries to do the same thing, but FinOps is doing this at a lower level. And that's why the optimization techniques and what we're doing to be able to measure that investment to business value is at this lower level of, if we invest in this sort of service, if we use this type of storage, how is this going to help us? I do believe that the two thoughts and philosophies need to work together. So And one of the things that they're doing is that FinOps is actually pushing the cadence of forecasting for these ITFM teams. Something that may have happened quarterly, semi-annually, even on a monthly cadence, is getting pushed to something that's happening more like what FinOps does, where they're changing their forecasting day to day, doing these month-over-month comparisons. And certainly your data center and your on-prem is not changing so quickly, but there are levers that are actually quite variable here. And so I wouldn't say it's one versus the other, but being able to take both into account. And one of the things that I would say is just establish visibility, standardized visibility across your on-prem and your public cloud solutions, public cloud environments. Things like standardized tagging. If you're looking at storage costs, are you tagging your on-prem storage costs to the storage costs that you're using within the cloud providers? And certainly there are different pricing models and different ways of consumption, but you do want to create this level of standardization as much as you can.
Awesome. So let's move to the migration reality, which is a big focus of a lot of strategies right now in customers that we're talking to. And maybe we'll start with Sean. 63% reported to us that they've changed their strategy 2 or more times since the acquisition. What are you seeing in the field? What's that first attempt looking like? Why is it failing? And are we learning as we go here, or are we falling into analysis paralysis? What are your thoughts?
I think first and foremost, I'm surprised that it isn't higher, that more people are trying 2 or 3 different avenues, because I think that what it speaks to on the VMware side is VMware was such a complete product and such a complete suite of capabilities that moving away from it to any other strategy is difficult, to say the least. To pick up all of those capabilities that were built into that suite is not impossible, but certainly requires you to identify gaps, identify spaces where you had customizations and automations and those sorts of things, and try to backfill those gaps. That's going to take time, because I think everyone wants to evaluate more than one product on any selection that they're going to make. And because of that, you always identify things that maybe you don't like, maybe you don't understand, but real business impacts are being picked up in these evaluations. And those are just tough to do with one vendor. So that's primarily why we're seeing that number so high.
And Mike, when you hear 4% have migrated fully, does that surprise you, or does it validate the complexity that in these environments that Sean's talking about? And where are you seeing organizations underestimate the technical complexity of a massive migration?
Yeah, so it doesn't surprise me at all. I think it absolutely does underline the complexity that's involved with this shift. If you look at it, even going from one VMware version to another, for years, customers have struggled with some of those very complex upgrades. And the tight coupling in the VCF suite has not made things any better. So I think the one thing that's really underestimated as part of a migration to another hypervisor plane is really operational coupling. A lot of times we see our customers are very myopically focused on what hypervisor replaces all of my technical capabilities, but they're not taking into account the operational coupling of what that looks like during a migration. What happens if one of our apps goes down in production and the help desk has no idea where it lives? What happens to our SOPs and all of those things that we've built around VMware for the last 10 years that are no longer functional because we're in the middle of a migration? So I would pay attention to the operational processes that surround this. And I would end with, migration isn't the hard part. It's the coexistence, because a lot of our customers are going to be stuck in these motions for 18 to 30 months if they're looking to shift away, if not longer in some cases.
Yeah. All while spinning plates of old, new, and migration in real time. Ghufran, you've got active migrations in flight right now. Walk us through the first 90 days when customers are committing to moving, and what surprises show up. Are you seeing anything new in surprises, or is it the same old stuff we've seen with migrations in the past?
we're seeing a trend, and there's a lot of common things which people miss out. So this 4% completion doesn't surprise me. And what we're seeing in the first 90 days is that customers underestimate, I think, three things. The first thing is the dependency mapping, skill transition, and the compliance approval cycles. And the biggest surprise for me is it's not a technical migration. People think it's about migrating your hypervisor. It's not that. That's the easy bit, really. The most important thing is minimizing risk to the business and your change management process. What's the business process impact of this journey we're about to embark upon? And it is a journey. And I've seen cases where a customer called us in late to the game. They spent at least 60 days just documenting their application dependencies because there's no automation tools in place. And then they spent such a long time because they've never done that before, and the automation itself was new to them. And that's quite a common scenario. Customers haven't automated, and now they're thinking about, or they're being forced to migrate. So, and then there's also this thing called hidden VMware, the vCenter integrations, the backup dependencies, all these monitoring tools which nobody knows what's happening in the background. And so it's really interesting because change management becomes really important, and your automation maturity level is important with the customer on the approach you take. And what I'm finding is the customers that are succeeding in this, they're treating this as an infra modernization approach. It's not a knee-jerk panic migration. And they're using this whole complexity as an opportunity to clean up this decade or more of technical debt they have.
This is exactly what I saw when I did on-prem to Azure. The organizations who were modernizing and really taking a hard look at their workloads and what needed to be brought into the newer state of things almost always succeeded. So, all right, let's talk about something that we've heard a lot about. And Sean, I know this is something you've been exploring with customers in even the last few weeks. The hardware that underpins a lot of on-prem strategies is in a really interesting place right now because of the demand around AI and other things that have upticked. And obviously, the cloud providers themselves have economies of scale and are gobbling up a lot of the inventory that's available. And our customers are telling us that they face a triple whammy. So VMware licensing is obviously increasing. There's this big upgrade to VCF 9 that's coming very quickly and is on everyone's horizon. And then you think about things like the memory costs from SanDisk that have skyrocketed very quickly. One customer said to us that they called this paying for the old house while building the new one. How are we advising customers caught in this bind, and what are you hearing in the field?
So, of course, the natural instinct in this situation is, like Ghufran referenced, right, to kind of knee jerk and panic react to the way this is happening. But in a lot of cases, the reality is what it is. I think when the acquisition first happened, some people signed some longer term contracts, 3 to 5 years, 5 years for the lucky ones, 3 years, I think, for the predominant group. And what they didn't think about was, the transitionary phase of, at some point, we're going to have to switch to this full VCF package. We're going to have to take on this. The VMware world is full of laggards in the sense that everybody tried to hold on because upgrades are not simple. Everybody tries to hold on to the last version as long as they possibly can, and they like to be the last to migrate to the new one. In those cases, those are the folks now who have signed longer term contracts, are now up against a deadline where they need to migrate. They're still making infrastructure decisions around which workloads are we moving to cloud, how much infrastructure do we need to rebuy, because we have to do an infrastructure upgrade if VCF is going to have any possibility of running properly and running, in a performant manner so that everyone will, relive the same experience. So they really are caught in, quite frankly, that triple tax situation. They're going to pay more to be in this new realm with VMware. They're going to have to do hardware refreshes in some, maybe even most cases, because it's a requirement, of the new stack. And then when they go to do those hardware refreshes, they're facing, right now, a RAM shortage, a compute shortage, globally. Anyone who's looked at the RAM prices over the last 12 months, they are 6, 8x what they cost just a year ago. So that is causing you to have to pay in real time more, because if I don't order these servers now, they won't show up by the time I need to rack and stack and plumb and get everything ready to run in time to get this upgrade done. So they really are just, everything is culminating at one time into this perfect storm of triple tax.
Mike, maybe you can make this somewhat real, because I know you've been a part of these massive or these kind of big jumps in versioning for VMware. What, for customers that are on their current environment and are looking to upgrade or having to upgrade in the next 20 months, what does that upgrade look like? Where's the pain typically stem from, and what types of decisions need to be happening right now?
If you're looking at this upgrade, I would highly recommend getting in front of it. The reality is that I've been through a lot of VMware upgrades. None of them have been flawless. There's dependencies throughout the application stack, and with the tighter coupling of things inside of VCF, it sounds great in theory, is that you should push a button and everything should upgrade. The reality is really far from that. I think that each of your environments is going to take a significant amount of time to upgrade, to go through the role of making sure that everything works and functions and is coupled together. This is an extremely extensive task to upgrade all of your systems. It's not just there's a new vSphere version and we need to upgrade vCenter and then all of our hosts. It's we need to go through and update all of our surrounding systems that are helping to support the hypervisor, and then go through and update the hypervisor. So, for most customers, you're going to have to go through that process at least twice. Most customers have at least a dev and a production environment that are mirrored so that they can test and validate things. Some of our customers are looking at having to go through this 4 times in a row. So the pain is very real. And I would start to look at this sooner rather than later.
What's interesting to me, and Ghufran, maybe you can comment here, is like you kind of have this this tough decision between if I let's say I've renewed for 3 to 5 years, if I stay on this path and I upgrade, which I'm feeling forced to do, that's going to be very painful. And outside of just even cost for infrastructure, which could be very high right now, there's always a cost on the business for resources that are dedicated to this. There's risk in the business. There's just time and attention that goes away from other things. At what point in time does it make more financial sense, or maybe less risk sense to the business, to go, all right, we're not going to invest in upgrading. We're going to look into an alternative platform entirely, because with the end in mind, we know we want to reduce VMware over the next, let's just call it 5 to 10 years. Are you having these types of conversations now where you're looking at that ROI, and what are you consulting your customers on in that regard?
Yeah, Sean, that's really important, that conversation. I think whichever alternative you're going to be going to, whether it's going to be a Nutanix or an OpenShift or a Proxmox, we don't really care, to be honest. It's what's right for the customer. And I think the pivot point is really, for me, about 40 to 50% of your hardware refresh budget. And when a customer realizes they've got to spend, say, £2 million on new hardware just to stay with VMware, you think that same budget could get you a Nutanix type of solution with better performance and the licensing trap for a lot less. And there's a number of factors driving this, apart from the kind of geopolitical and the rate at which hardware is produced. Memory costs, as Sean mentioned, it's accelerating decisions. And we were talking to a customer recently, and we said, look, you've got about 200 VMs, and your VCF 9 upgrade is going to cost about just 1.2, 1.3 million pounds in hardware alone, and that's a lot of money. And we're saying, look, if you have a service orchestration layer with CloudBolt, with Nutanix as part of your hardware refresh, you can pay less than that, including migration services. So you put these options in front of the customer, and at the end of the day, it's cost is a really big factor. And but what's interesting is this psychology shift. I think 6 months ago, customers were asking, should we migrate? But now it's they're saying, should we throw good money after bad? And like you were saying earlier on, Will, are we going to invest in our future, or are we just going to carry on and wait till things get really bad? It's a different conversation now.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a good segue into kind of the next topic, which is where workloads really going. When we performed our research, we asked those who were submitting to kind of tell us where their heads at right now, 2 years into this disruption, and you see a primary migration destination is public cloud. 34%, as Tracy mentioned earlier, are going back on prem in some way, shape, or form. And I think what we're seeing right now is with that public cloud being the predominant option for most VMware customers who are looking to scale down. I guess to you, Tracy, how do you reconcile these two forces of stuff moving back on-prem, but then the pressure to move into the cloud or the decision to move into the cloud because of the squeeze? Are organizations trading one cost unpredictability problem for another? How are you discussing this with your customers today?
I mean, I wouldn't say that it's a cost and predictability issue. It's more about a performance issue, a latency issue, a regulatory compliance issue. Those things are top of mind. Cost and predictability, I mean, the cost management of on-premises, the cost management of cloud is largely predictable until you get into areas like AI. And that introduces a whole new set of cost levers, a whole new area of forecasting unknowns that you can't do. So I wouldn't say that it was necessarily unpredictable if you have the right governance and guardrails, if you have set up teams in place to be able to manage things like anomalies, being able to filter out the white noise, being able to do root cause analysis by taking advantage of your AI ops observability solution to take proactive steps, doing lots of shift left initiatives. There isn't really an unpredictable nature to it if you're doing it correctly. And so that's the thing that I talk to you about with my clients. They're not necessarily saying, one is more unpredictable than the other. They're more asking about where are the decisions and what should we be thinking about if we're migrating to one versus the other. And also it focuses more on the operating model. How do we manage and structure our teams so that they can support both environments?
So Sean, maybe to you, there's a lot of movement in multiple directions right now. And what's interesting is, you've been a part of this arc from on-prem to public, and you watch that happen in real time. But for IT leaders who've gone through this cycle several times now, it does feel like most career professionals who have oversaw on-prem and public cloud have been through some sine wave of this pattern. Has the exhaustion set in? I mean, does this time feel different? Are IT leaders kind of going, well, this is just the new reality, and things are just going to have to be composable and transferable across clouds? What are you hearing?
The concept in and of itself is like whiplash. Everyone is feeling that pain. And I think that pain comes through in various ways, right? It comes through in the camps, right? The cloud camp, the on-premise camp that kind of feel like they conflict with each other. And it comes through in them in an I told you so moment, right? Where they feel like, I knew I was right about this. We never should have moved a workload this place or that place. But I think that's where I feel it from a customer owner perspective, where my customers are coming to me. They feel very passionately about some of the moves that they've made. But I think the learning moment from all of this is, kind of what everyone on this panel has kind of touched on earlier, which is it's really going to force that inventory, that digging in, that prescriptive, what are we doing with each of these workloads, that's going to solve the nature of the beast, because both camps are right about each of, in their own ways. The cloud camp is right. The on-premise camp is right. I mean, they just have to solve for each of those applications, for each of those workloads, around sovereignty, around data ownership, around latency, time to value. They're really going to have to solve for that. So I think it's going to force a reckoning that's been long overdue.
Yeah. Ghufran, from your perspective, what are the deciding factors, the biggest deciding factors when looking at the options right now? for either staying on-prem and going to a different hypervisor, or moving to the public cloud, or some combination of that.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken about previously what kind of FinOps platform, and the cost is quite important. I think the conversation that I'm having at the moment is it comes down to three questions I always ask. Where is your data, and what's the quality of that data? Who controls your costs, and what happens if you want to leave? And we know public cloud sometimes can win on speed to market, but we're seeing, as you mentioned before, repatriation of around 30 to 40%. Once customers are feeling this whole OpEx reality and the kind of reality of shadow IT in the cloud, and on-prem alternatives like Nutanix do win on predictability, cost, and control. And also look at the deciding factors of regulation compliance, data gravity, because at the end of the day, your data becomes critical to your business. And honestly, I think trust is really important now. And after getting burnt by Broadcom, customers want infrastructure that they can control. The customer needs to be in control. So this hybrid is default, as we know. And I think no single platform solves every use case. The key is choosing a number of platforms that work together seamlessly, and not just whatever's cheapest today.
So, good transition to the next topic, but I'll stay with you, Ghufran. You're working on lab environments for migrations. You have a ton of migrations underway. Let's talk about containerization. Are your customers focused on that right now? We've talked about modernization. Is it largely a lift and shift, or are you seeing real-time containerization or moving to different services while staying on-prem, or is it mostly aspirational?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting because a couple of years ago we were talking about application modernization and FinOps. This whole thing about let's do things in containers and the freedom to move wherever you want to move. The reality is different, and I think, brutally being honest, most customers that we're speaking to today, they're not doing enterprise stuff with containers. Maybe 20% are doing containerization during migration, but those are greenfield applications. But I think the reality I'm seeing is these business applications weren't designed for containers. Your CRM system, your legacy ERP system, your legacy databases, they're staying VMs for the foreseeable future. But it gets interesting when you look at what does modernization really mean. You won't wake up one morning and everything's modern. We've got to have a platform that gives us both paths. Traditional VMs for legacy workloads, native Kubernetes for new development, and customers aren't choosing VM or container. They're choosing a platform that supports the whole entire application lifecycle. And just how infrastructure is hybrid, your application stack is hybrid as well. You may have a mixture of a client server, end tier, as I mentioned, VMs, microservices, and containers. For me, what's success? It's you've got to start and get off VMware first into a stable platform, which allows you to start your modernization journey. If you're going to try and do both together, modernize and move off your VM, you're asking for trouble. I guess so. Modernize after you've got a stable platform to build from.
Mike, do you have any response to that? I mean, is that what you're seeing in the field as well? Or is there a percentage of workloads that are still, on-prem ready for containerization, or is it largely to the point, a lot of stuff that maybe just wasn't a good candidate to begin with, that just needs simpler replatforming at this point?
Yeah, I think just throwing your application inside of a container does not equal app modernization, right? Ghufran hit on it, but breaking that app down into different microservices so that they can be developed independently of one another, still dependent on each other for function of the app as a whole. But that process takes time. It takes understanding. It takes re-architecture. I would say 10 to 20% or less are true container candidates to pull from your VMware estate and just pop into a container. That's just not the reality. I think more often than not, if the original pain or the impetus to move is really to save costs, I think that replatforming probably delivers 80% of the value without all of the headaches that come along with it. There's a lot of time that takes into developing these applications to be container ready. So leveraging a cost-efficient hypervisor or a managed path data store or refactoring specific tiers often yields a better ROI than just a full container rewrite.
All right. let's move into one of our last topics, which is just kind of the operational model of hybrid. And I'll start with you, Sean. We talked about strategic optionality, building the ability to move workloads where they make sense. But optionality has a cost. And I think the question to you is, what is the difference between an organization doing hybrid well versus one that's drowning in it? At this point, there's been a lot of conversation around making your workloads transferable and transportable for a while now. And the burning that keeps happening because of these seismic shifts in the market really are putting an impetus on this now. So talk to us about what a good hybrid strategy looks like and what people are learning this time.
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to understanding, the proper place for each of your workloads, understanding that, I think Tracy touched on this earlier, right? At some point, the right answer is a hybrid model for most of the workloads that are in the wild today. And just accepting that as a known, and then understanding that anything that you want to build from an operational standpoint, that operational aspect of your workloads, of your applications, where that lives, we've spent 20 years trying to push that operational mode as close to the users as we possibly could through self-service catalogs, through automation, through orchestration. We've been trying to push it as close to the user community as we can so that time to value is good. Efficiency, operational efficiency inside of your corporations are good. As you start to split out into those other factors where now you're dealing with two working environments, or three working environments, how you really consolidate the operational level and the management level of that is just critical.
Yeah, I agree. Just with what Sean's saying, I think the difference between hybrid success and drowning, to me, it's kind of two key things: having a unified management plane and a clear workload placement policy. And those customers doing it well, I've got a methodology in place. They've got some clear decision trees, such as legacy apps will stay VMware. We're not going to touch them. New apps go Nutanix, for example. Application blueprints go CloudBolt, for example, and containers go Kubernetes. So, and you shouldn't be making an emotional decision. We all love tech for the sake of tech, but at the end of the day, what's best for the business? You've got a methodology in place. You've got to follow your framework. The ones that are drowning and struggling are those they're managing 5 different platforms with 5 different skill sets, 5 ways of working at least, and every outage becomes a finger pointing exercise. And that's we're seeing a lot of that, these islands of management. And back in the day, we were talking about systems management. We're seeing remnants of that still there. And you've got to kind of have this unified platform, a unified management plane for success. And I'm seeing I think the biggest operational mistake, I think, is treating this hybrid model as temporary. It's not something we're just going to do for a few months and then go back to the old way of working. It's got to be permanent. Plan for it being permanent and invest in the tools and strategy and training accordingly, because these half measures will cost you more in the long run.
Mike, do you have any advice from what you've seen in the field around how to get there for customers who may be struggling with this?
Sure. I mean, if we're talking that unified management plane, the thing that you select should allow you to bring the things that you're already doing today to be able to test and validate against these new endpoints, right? If you have capabilities that you're capable of delivering in the VMware environment, why would you then go to OpenShift or Nutanix and rebuild everything from the ground up? So I think reusability is key when we're talking about the unified management plane or a control plane. And really the user disruption is what you should aim for. The administrators are going to be dug into this because they're the ones migrating, doing things behind the scenes. But I think the more seamless that you can make this whole process look for the end users through that unified management plane, I think the more successful you're going to be as a business going through this.
And Tracy, I'd love your perspective on, there's clearly diversification is a theme here. There's going to be a lot of things moving to different places. And public cloud's going to get some of that share. Other hypervisors are going to get part of that share. And even some of the kind of the newer private clouds that you had mentioned earlier in the discussion are going to get some of that share. I'd be interested to hear your take on, are the financial frameworks and communities and patterns in the organization ready for this? Because, really FinOps was born out of the chaos that came with public cloud adoption. We're in a reckoning with AI adoption, and we're in a reckoning with diversification. Do you feel like the movement there is ready to take this on, or do we still have a ways to go?
There are parts that are getting ready. I mean, if you look at the expanding scope of FinOps, you look at what teams are doing. Early leading edge FinOps teams are starting to look at this, and in some cases, it's just a FinOps team that's looking at both areas. I do see the personas and the roles converging. I do think that it's going to be a while until they're completely and fully integrated, but ultimately that's where we want to go, is to make sure that the cost management perspective of the on-premises side, the cost management perspective of what's happening within cloud, within SaaS, within all the other sorts of cost levers that you have to manage, are being run in a way where they are a cohesive manner, and which is why you're starting to see FinOps and FinOps teams. It's probably like 2 years ago now, where they were starting to fit under your cloud operating model. It's not so much a FinOps team, so much as a FinOps team that is feeding into the cost perspectives for different decisions that we make for investments for cloud operations.
So, final round, one final question. We'll have everybody rapid fire with their response. And Tracy, we'll stay with you. The question here is, if you had one piece of advice for a CIO who's stuck between stay and optimize, start migrating somewhere else, what would you tell them to do this quarter?
For CIOs, make sure that you have cost transparency. If you are going to start to implement the same philosophies as what you have on the FinOps side, individual accountability, real-time decision-making, cross-functional collaboration, one of the things that you need to do is make those practices and policies dispensable, especially with allocation. Because ultimately, that's where everything goes as far as cost management and optimization. The other thing I would start thinking about is what I was saying before, is having some form of unified visibility, being able to pair the costs of similar items, whether it's compute, whether it's storage, to get an overall view of how you're managing costs.
Yeah, so I'd say stop trying to optimize a broken economic model. We're seeing that Broadcom has fundamentally changed the game. You can't optimize your way out of a 400% at least cost increase. So here's what I'd do this quarter specifically. Pick 50 non-critical virtual machines and run a migration plan to Nutanix and CloudBolt. Not your crown jewel applications which are low risk to the business, something you can afford to break, get your team trained, understand the process, build confidence. And this decision isn't stay versus go. It's about control versus uncertainty. And every day you stay is another day of vendor lock-in deepening. And every pilot you run is another step toward this strategic optionality. So stop analyzing and start experimenting. Do POVs. You're going to learn more from one 60-day pilot than from 6 months of going through vendor presentations and pitch deck after pitch deck. And when it's not if VMware gets worse, you'll be ready to act and not react.
It's all about optionality, right? If you're at the CIO level, ensure that whatever your plan is, and have a plan, right? But whatever your plan is, leaves your future with options. I think if we've learned one thing from any of this, it's that nothing lasts very long in this business. So locking yourself into one vendor, locking yourself into one technology, not offering yourself that optionality, will cause you to be the CIO of someone else's business, I imagine, if you don't leave yourself in that situation.
All right. And finally, over to you, Mike.
So Sean stole my thunder, so I'll give a different piece of advice. So I would say run a 90-day dual track strategy. One, reduce the workloads as best you can in VMware. Work with optimizing your current VMware spend. Reduce virtual machines as you can. Get rid of the ones that you're not using, so that your estate is cleared up and you don't have to succumb to increased pricing pressure around the memory issue. Simultaneously, I would also highly recommend and lean in on what Sean said, is implement a control plane abstraction. That way you can design for optionality. And as part of that, stand up one viable alternative platform in production, even if it's a small. Just like Ghufran said, let's get started now. Let's start to get our hands on these tools and see how they work in our environment with our requirements.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for the insights today and the exploration. Tracy, appreciate you being on. Sean, Ghufran, Mike, always a pleasure, and really hope that people get a chance to watch this and have a ton of takeaways. There are a couple things that we'll just share out quickly before we go. If you've not read the research report that we've been quoting this entire time, we do have a QR code you can scan here to grab that. And we are going to be having a series of webinars upcoming, specifically focused on navigating VMware price increases and the volatility, as well as migration. And we are looking for kind of leader-to-leader discussion on what's working, what's not working, and where people are stuck. So that is something that you can join that's upcoming in March. Should be really good discussions there. But thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you to our panelists, and we'll see you next time.